The will had one condition. Kate and the stranger who had lived in her uncle's house for 7 years had to share it. Every room, every meal, every day, for exactly 180 days. If either of them left even once, the other got everything. She needed the money to save her mother's life. He needed the house to save his own. Kate arrived from Chicago under circumstances that did not allow emotional distraction. The purpose of her trip was to secure her mother's long-term care. The medical bills were already astronomical, and Ashwood Manor was the only asset that could guarantee a specialized facility for the years to come. It wasn't about a sudden surgery. It was about preventing a slow, dignified collapse of everything they had left. That fact alone defined her focus from the moment she left home. The flight to London felt longer than it should have, not because of distance itself, but because of the pressure of what awaited her. The inheritance of Ashwood Manor was the only viable financial solution she had left. As the aircraft landed and she moved through the airport, everything felt procedural. Immigration, baggage claim, transport arrangements. Each step was just movement toward the final destination. She did not allow herself to think beyond that. Thinking beyond it meant uncertainty, and uncertainty was not useful right now. Outside the airport, the air in London felt different from Chicago. Not dramatically so, but noticeably. Quieter in a way that was not purely about noise, but about rhythm. The city did not press itself forward the same way. It felt more spaced out, more reserved, as if everything was happening at a slightly slower emotional tempo. The car that was arranged for her waited near the curb. The driver greeted her politely, but without unnecessary conversation. Kate appreciated that. She did not want conversation. She wanted completion. She got into the back seat, placing the folder of documents on her lap. These papers represented her responsibility, and responsibility had always required control. As the car began moving away from the airport, the city gradually shifted around her. Glass buildings and traffic slowly gave way to quieter streets, then to residential areas, and eventually to countryside roads that seemed less structured, more organic in their layout. Kate watched the transition carefully, not because she was emotionally invested in the scenery, but because she needed to understand where she was being taken. Ashwood Manor was located outside the main urban area. That much she already knew from the documents. What she had not fully processed was what that meant in physical reality. The further they drove, the more the environment changed. Roads became narrower. Houses appeared less frequently. Trees grew denser along the sides of the road, forming long stretches where visibility ahead was partially limited. The sky above remained gray, but now it felt lower, closer to the ground. Kate did not speak during the journey. Neither did the driver. The silence was not uncomfortable, but it was deliberate in a way that made her more aware of time passing. Eventually, the car turned off the main road. The shift was immediate. The path became narrower, more private. The surface changed slightly under the tires, the sound of movement becoming softer, more muted. Trees now formed a continuous line on both sides, creating a corridor-like approach that led deeper into isolation. Kate leaned slightly forward, watching. This was not a public route. This was access controlled by ownership. That thought alone reminded her why she was here. After several more minutes, the car slowed. Kate noticed it before the driver said anything. The reduction in speed, the subtle narrowing of focus ahead, the sense of arrival without announcement. Then she saw the gates. They were large, iron, and clearly old. Not decorative in a modern sense, but functional in a way that suggested permanence. They marked the boundary of the estate with a firmness that felt almost final. There was no ambiguity in their presence. The car came to a stop in front of them. The driver remained silent for a moment, then simply waited. Kate looked forward through the windshield. Beyond the gates, she could already see part of the estate grounds, though not the full structure yet. Trees, gravel path, and distant stonework partially visible through the opening space. She reached for the door handle. No hesitation. She stepped out. The air outside was noticeably colder than inside the car. It carried a dampness that made everything feel slightly heavier. Kate adjusted her coat and stood for a moment, observing the gates as they began to open slowly. The motion was steady and controlled, driven by mechanisms that had clearly been maintained over time. The sound of metal shifting echoed faintly across the quiet surroundings. As the gates opened wider, the estate behind them became fully visible. Ashwood Manor. It was larger than she had expected from the documents, but not in a dramatic or exaggerated way. Its size was not about luxury. It was about presence. The structure was made of aged stone, darkened by time, with sections that suggested different periods of construction rather than a single architectural vision. The windows were tall and narrow, reflecting the sky in muted tones without revealing anything inside. The building did not feel abandoned. It felt maintained, but in a restrained way, as if preservation mattered more than display. The grounds around it were open but structured. Paths were visible, vegetation controlled but not overly manicured. There was order, but not decoration. Everything seemed to serve a function. Kate began walking forward along the driveway. Each step brought her closer, not just physically, but in consequence. The inheritance was no longer abstract. It was here. As she approached the entrance, she noticed a figure standing near the doorway. A man. He was already waiting. He did not move toward her. He did not show surprise. He simply stood there with a calm, composed posture, as if her arrival was not unexpected. Kate slowed slightly, but continued forward until she reached a natural stopping distance. A heavy silence settled between them, broken only by the distant caw of a bird somewhere on the estate. The man kept his gaze fixed on her, unblinking and steady. Then he said, calmly and simply, "You're here." Kate did not respond immediately. This was not how she imagined the beginning of an inheritance process, but it was the beginning nonetheless. And Ashwood Manor, silent and still behind him, felt like it had been waiting for her longer than she had known its name. Kate stood in front of the entrance of Ashwood Manor for a brief moment longer than she intended, not because she was intimidated, but because she was adjusting her expectations in real time. The man who had spoken first remained where he was, calm and composed, watching her without urgency. "You're here," he had said. It was not a question, and it was not a greeting she could easily respond to. Kate chose not to react emotionally. She had learned long ago that situations that began with ambiguity usually required clarity, not emotion. "I assume you're connected to the estate," she said finally. The man nodded slightly. "Yes." "Lawyer?" she asked. "I've looked after this place for Harold, long enough to know its secrets." Kate narrowed her eyes slightly at the phrasing. Manage was not the same as own, but it also was not neutral. "I'm here for the inheritance of Harold Whitmore," she said. "I was told everything would be ready for review and signing." At the mention of the name, something subtle changed in his expression. Not surprise, but recognition mixed with restraint, as if the name carried weight beyond paperwork. "It is ready," he said, "but not in the way you are expecting." Kate exhaled slowly. "That's not a reassuring answer." "It is an accurate one," he replied. That distinction irritated her slightly, but she did not show it. "Where is the attorney?" she asked. "He is inside," the man said, stepping slightly aside. "And waiting." Kate studied him for a moment longer. He was not blocking her, but he also wasn't inviting her in with any warmth. This was procedural, not welcoming. That suited her fine. She stepped forward. The moment she crossed the threshold, the environment changed noticeably. The sound from outside faded almost immediately, as if the doors absorbed it completely. The entrance hall was large, but not empty in a decorative sense. It was structured. There was a wide staircase leading upward, walls lined with framed portraits and older photographs, and a layout that suggested long history rather than modern redesign. Kate slowed slightly as she looked around. No modern technology was visible. No screens, no visible security panels, nothing that suggested recent modernization beyond basic maintenance. That detail registered in her mind, though she did not dwell on it yet. The man walked ahead of her without speaking further. "This way," he said simply. Kate followed. They moved through a corridor that extended deeper into the manor. Doors lined both sides, some identical, others slightly different in design, suggesting that the building had been expanded or modified over time rather than constructed all at once. Kate noticed the lack of consistent symmetry. That mattered. It implied layers of construction, possibly different owners or periods of renovation. Eventually, they stopped in front of a large wooden door. The man paused. "This is the main hall," he said. Kate frowned slightly. "For the reading of the will?" "Yes," he confirmed. She did not like that answer, not because it was wrong, but because it implied formality she had not been prepared for. She had expected a legal office or a neutral meeting room, not a central hall in a private estate. Before she could respond, The door opened from inside. The attorney was already there. An older man, formally dressed, seated at a long table with documents arranged carefully in front of him. His posture was professional, controlled, and practiced. Across from him sat another man, younger, sitting with a calm, composed posture that did not match the tension Kate felt entering the room. Both men looked toward her as she stepped inside. The attorney adjusted his papers slightly. "Miss Caldwell," he said, "please take a seat." Kate did not immediately sit. Her attention moved briefly between the two men already present. Then she took the seat opposite them. Paul remained motionless, his hands folded flat on the mahogany surface, tracking her every move with a sharp, calculated focus. The attorney cleared his throat. "We are here to proceed with the reading of the last will and testament of Harold Whitmore," he said. Kate finally sat back slightly. The process had begun, but already it felt less like procedure and more like the beginning of something she had not been told the full rules of. The attorney opened the folder in front of him with practiced precision, aligning the documents as if every movement had been repeated many times before. The room itself remained quiet, but it was not a comfortable silence. It was the kind of silence that existed before information changed everything. Kate sat upright, her hands now resting lightly on the edge of the table. Across from her, the younger man remained still, watching without interruption. He had not introduced himself, and no one had offered to do so yet. That detail registered in the back of Kate's mind, but she pushed it aside for the moment. Names would come with context. Context was what mattered. The attorney cleared his throat once more. "Before we proceed," he said, "I must confirm the presence of all designated parties." His eyes moved briefly across the room. "Miss Kate Caldwell is present." Kate gave a small, controlled nod. "And Mr. Paul Ashford is present." The name landed cleanly in the room. Paul. The man across from her did not react outwardly, but Kate noticed a subtle shift in his attention at the mention of his name. Not surprise, more like acknowledgement of formality being completed. Kate looked at him directly for the first time in a focused way. So this was Paul. He met her gaze without hesitation. The attorney continued. "With both parties present, we may proceed." He opened the first page. The estate of Harold Whitmore includes Ashwood Manor and all associated property holdings, to be divided equally between the two named inheritors. Kate blinked once. "Equally," she repeated, before she could stop herself. The attorney nodded. "Yes." She glanced at Paul again. He did not look surprised either. That fact alone made her more cautious. The attorney continued reading. "This inheritance is subject to conditional residency. Both inheritors are required to reside within Ashwood Manor for a continuous period of 180 days from the date of activation of the will." Kate frowned slightly. "Residency?" "Yes," the attorney confirmed. "Continuous residence within the property is mandatory for validation of inheritance rights." Kate leaned forward slightly. "And if we don't?" The attorney did not hesitate. "In the event that either party leaves the estate before completion of the required period, their entitlement is forfeited to the remaining inheritor." Silence followed immediately after. Kate's gaze sharpened. "So either I stay here for 6 months with someone I've never met," she said slowly, "or I leave and lose everything I came for." "That is correct," the attorney said. Kate turned her attention fully to Paul now. "Did you know about this?" she asked directly. Paul's eyes didn't flinch as they met hers. "No," he said, the word dropping like a stone into deep water. He offered nothing more, leaving the air between them thick with unanswered questions. Just clarity. Kate studied him carefully for a moment longer, trying to determine whether there was any inconsistency in his reaction. There wasn't, or at least none she could detect yet. The attorney continued speaking, but Kate barely registered the rest of the legal phrasing. Additional clauses, administrative conditions, maintenance responsibilities. All of it blurred behind the central condition that now defined everything. 180 days. Shared residence. Loss on departure. Finally, the attorney closed the folder. "I recommend both parties review the documentation in detail before making any decisions," he said. Kate let out a slow breath through her nose. "I don't have the luxury of delays," she said. The attorney looked slightly uncomfortable but did not respond. Kate stood up. "I need time to think," she said. He stood as she did, not aggressively, but in parallel motion, as if the situation required shared movement even if they were not aligned in purpose. Kate turned toward the door. As she reached it, she paused slightly, then spoke without turning back. "This isn't normal," she said. There was no reply from the attorney. But Paul answered quietly. "No," he said. Kate opened the door and stepped out. Paul followed a moment later. The corridor outside felt longer than it had when she entered. Or perhaps it only felt that way now that the situation had changed. Kate walked ahead without looking back. "You're staying here too," she said. "Yes," Paul replied. "By choice." A brief pause. "Yes," he said again. Kate exhaled slowly. "Great," she muttered. And for the first time, the inheritance did not feel like paperwork. It felt like confinement with rules she was still learning. The corridor outside the main hall stretched forward in both directions, lined with closed doors and dim, evenly spaced lighting. Kate walked ahead without slowing, her steps controlled but firm. Behind her, Paul followed at a consistent distance, neither closing in nor falling back. The silence between them was no longer neutral. It had weight now, shaped by what had just been read in the will. 180 days. Kate finally broke it first. "This is insane," she said without turning around. Paul didn't respond immediately. "That's your professional opinion?" she added, sharper. "I don't have a professional opinion," he replied. "I live here." That made her pause slightly in her stride. She turned her head just enough to look at him. "You live here?" "Yes." "Before I arrived?" "Yes." Kate stopped walking completely. Paul stopped a step later. She turned fully toward him now. "So you were already part of this estate before I showed up?" Paul met her gaze. "Yes." Kate studied him for a moment. "And you didn't think that was relevant information to share before the will was read?" A brief pause. "I didn't know how it would be presented," he said. "That's not an answer," she replied immediately. "It is the only honest one," he said. Kate let out a short breath through her nose. "You're very careful with your wording." "I have to be," he replied. She crossed her arms. "Why?" Another pause. "Because everything here has consequences," he said. Kate shook her head slightly. "You keep saying that like it means something specific." "It does," Paul said simply. She held his gaze for a moment longer, then looked away down the corridor. "This place doesn't feel like a normal inheritance," she said. "It isn't," he replied. That was the first time he answered her without hesitation. Kate noticed. She turned back toward him. "Then what is it?" Paul's pace faltered for a fraction of a second. He looked toward the shadows at the end of the hall, his expression tightening, as if he were wrestling with a memory he wasn't ready to share. "It's structured," he said finally. Kate frowned. "Everything is structured. That doesn't explain anything." "This does," he said. He started walking again. Kate hesitated for a moment, then followed. They moved deeper into the manor, away from the main hall. The architecture subtly changed as they progressed. The corridor became slightly narrower, the materials older in appearance, the lighting less uniform. It was not a dramatic shift, but it was noticeable enough to suggest different sections of the building had been designed or maintained at different times. Kate observed it carefully. "This house is divided," she said. "Yes," Paul replied. "By what?" "Function," he said. Kate glanced at him. "That's not an answer." "It's the truth," he said. They reached a junction where the corridor split. Paul slowed. "Your room is this way," he said, pointing slightly to the left. Kate didn't move immediately. "My room?" "Yes," he confirmed. "I didn't agree to stay yet," she said. "You haven't refused either," he replied. That landed more firmly than she expected. Kate studied him for a moment, then turned toward the indicated direction. "And where are you staying?" she asked. "Here," he said. She narrowed her eyes slightly. "Meaning you're not leaving this place either?" "I owe Harold more than just labor," he said, his voice dropping to a low, rough edge. 10 years ago, when my own name was a liability in every legal circle back home, Harold was the only one who didn't look away. He gave me Ashwood not as a job, but as a sanctuary to rebuild a life that had been utterly dismantled. If I walk away now, I'm not just losing an inheritance. I'm losing the only proof that I'm more than my past mistakes. I'm the anchor, Kate, and I'm not lifting it until this is done. Kate paused again. That detail mattered more than it should have. She looked at him more carefully now. Not allowed by who? Paul didn't answer immediately. That hesitation returned. Kate exhaled slowly. Of course. She turned and walked toward the West Wing corridor without waiting for further explanation. Paul followed a few steps behind, as he had been doing since they left the main hall. Neither of them spoke until they reached a wooden door at the end of the corridor. Paul stopped. "This is yours," he said. Kate looked at it for a moment. Then she turned slightly toward him. "And I'm supposed to just accept that this is my life for the next 6 months." Paul gripped the edge of the door, his knuckles turning white against the dark wood. He took a measured breath before answering. "It's not your life, Kate. It's the condition." Kate stared at him. Then she opened the door and stepped inside. The room was simple, functional, prepared, but not luxurious. A bed, a desk, storage. Nothing unnecessary. Everything placed with deliberate practicality. She turned back toward Paul one last time. "I don't trust this," she said. "I don't either," he replied. That was the first moment they fully agreed. Kate closed the door, and the manor remained silent, as if it had already accepted the beginning of a process neither of them fully understood yet. Kate did not immediately move further into the room after closing the door. She remained standing for a moment, listening. The corridor outside was quiet. No footsteps, no voices, only the distant stillness of an old building that had settled into itself over time. She exhaled slowly and finally turned around. The room was exactly what she had already registered at first glance. Functional, prepared, but emotionally neutral. Nothing personal, nothing inviting, nothing that suggested ownership beyond necessity. That detail mattered more than she wanted to admit, because it confirmed something she already suspected. She was not being treated as a guest. She was being placed. Only then did she allow herself to sit on the edge of the bed. For a moment, she simply stayed still. 180 days. The number did not feel real in practice. It felt like a boundary drawn in theory, not yet tested by lived experience. A knock came at the door. Not loud. Controlled. Kate stood immediately. "Yes?" she called. The door opened without waiting for a full invitation. Paul stood in the doorway. Kate didn't relax. "I didn't say come in," she said. "I know," he replied. That answer was becoming a pattern she didn't like. He remained near the threshold instead of entering fully. "I brought something," he said. Kate didn't move closer. "What?" Paul held up a small sealed envelope. "The rest of the estate documentation," he said. Kate narrowed her eyes. "There's more?" "Yes." She stepped forward but did not take it immediately. Why wasn't this included in the reading? Paul paused slightly. "Because not everything is read at once," he said. Kate took the envelope from him. "Convenient," she muttered. Paul didn't react to the comment. Kate opened it immediately. Inside were additional legal pages, amendments, supplementary clauses, and handwritten notes that were clearly older than the printed documents from earlier. Her eyes moved quickly across the text, then stopped. A clause repeated in slightly different wording across multiple pages. Continuous residency is required for full validation of inheritance rights under estate conditions established by Harold Whitmore. Kate frowned. "This is redundant," she said quietly. Paul watched her carefully. "It's reinforcement." Kate looked up. "Or restriction." He didn't answer. That silence was enough. She flipped another page. There were references to property maintenance responsibilities, joint authority over estate decisions, and financial limitations tied to withdrawal from residence. Nothing illegal on its surface, but everything structured to discourage leaving. Kate looked up again. "This is designed so leaving becomes the worst option," she said. Paul didn't deny it. "I didn't design it," he said. Kate studied him for a moment. "But you're living under it." "Yes," he replied. A pause followed. Kate closed the envelope. "Who benefits from this?" she asked. Paul's jaw set into a hard, stubborn line. He looked at the sealed envelope in Kate's hand, as if it contained a countdown he couldn't stop. Less avoidance. More calculation. "Finally," he said, "that depends on completion." Kate frowned. Completion of what? Paul didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped back slightly into the corridor. "You should rest," he said instead. Kate narrowed her eyes. "That's not what I asked." "I know," he replied. Then he added, more quietly, "And you'll understand more tomorrow." Kate didn't respond. Paul remained for a moment longer, then turned and left. The door closed softly behind him. Kate stood still, holding the envelope. Then she placed it back on the desk without opening it further. Outside, the manor remained unchanged. But inside, the rules of her stay were already beginning to tighten around her in ways she could not yet fully name. Morning in Ashwood Manor arrived without sound or announcement, as if the building did not transition between night and day in any meaningful way. Light slowly shifted through the tall windows of Kate's room, replacing darkness with a muted gray illumination that did not feel like sunlight so much as filtered presence. Kate woke earlier than she intended. For a few seconds, she did not move. She simply lay still, staring at the ceiling, letting her mind reconnect with the fact that she was not in Chicago, not in a hotel, and not temporarily displaced in any simple sense. She was inside Ashwood Manor, and the legal reality of the inheritance had not changed overnight. 180 days. The number returned immediately, without effort. It had already begun to function less like a condition in paperwork and more like a structure she was expected to live inside. Kate finally sat up. Her movements were controlled, habitual. She had always been someone who transitioned quickly from rest to action, especially when situations were unstable. Staying still too long made uncertainty heavier. She stood, dressed, and took a moment before opening the door. When she stepped into the corridor, she expected silence, and she got it. No presence waiting outside. No immediate interaction. Only the long hallway stretching in both directions, lined with doors that looked identical at first glance, but not identical on closer inspection. Kate paused. The manor during daylight felt different than it had the previous evening. Not warmer, not safer, but more defined. Details that had been obscured in low light were now visible. Subtle differences in wood tone along the walls, slight variations in door framing, and sections of flooring that suggested repair or replacement at different times. This was not a single-period construction. It had been altered repeatedly. That detail mattered more than it should have in a legal context. Buildings that evolved over time often carried layered ownership histories. Layered ownership meant complexity in inheritance structure. Kate moved forward. Her footsteps were steady but not rushed. She was not exploring for curiosity. She was gathering orientation. As she reached the central junction of the corridor, she stopped. From the direction of the main hall, she heard movement. Not loud, not abrupt, controlled footsteps. She turned slightly. Paul appeared at the far end of the corridor a moment later. He stopped when he saw her. There was no surprise in his expression, as if encountering her at this time was expected rather than incidental. Kate studied him for a moment before answering. "I didn't sleep," Paul said. That was not new information, but it confirmed a pattern she was beginning to notice. Kate stepped closer. "You keep saying that like it's normal." "For me it is," he replied. "That's not an explanation," she said. "It's the truth," he answered. A brief silence followed. Kate crossed her arms slightly. "The attorney said we're reviewing more documents today." "Yes," Paul confirmed. Kate exhaled through her nose. "There are still more." "Yes." She gave a small, dry nod. "Of course there are." They began walking toward the main hall together, not immediately aligned, but naturally matching pace after a few steps. The corridor felt longer than it had the day before, though Kate knew that was perception rather than structure. The manor itself had not changed overnight. What had changed was her awareness of how much of it she had not yet seen. As they walked, Kate glanced at Paul. "You said I would understand more today," she said. "Yes," he replied. "That sounded like a promise yesterday," she added. "It wasn't a promise," he said. "It was preparation." Kate frowned slightly. Preparation for what exactly? Paul did not answer immediately. That hesitation returned, but it was different now. Less evasive, more measured. They reached the entrance to the main hall, but did not enter immediately. Paul finally said, "For what comes after the next documents?" Kate looked at his profile. He moved through the halls with a silent reverence, his hand occasionally grazing the mahogany panels not as an owner, but as a guardian. It wasn't just a job for him. It was a debt he seemed to be paying back in daily increments of silence. Kate narrowed her eyes slightly. "And what comes after them?" Paul looked at her directly. "Your choice becomes real," he said. That made her pause. "Right now it isn't?" she asked. "It is," he said, "but not informed yet." Kate held his gaze for a moment longer. Then she pushed the door open and stepped inside. The main hall felt the same structurally, but the atmosphere inside it had changed. The attorney was already seated at the long table, as before, but the arrangement of documents was different. There were more folders, more pages, and a second sealed envelope placed directly in front of Kate's seat. She stopped immediately upon seeing it. "That wasn't here yesterday," she said. The attorney nodded once. "No," he confirmed. Kate walked forward slowly, placing her folder down, but not sitting yet. Her attention moved between the documents and the sealed envelope. "What is this one?" she asked. The attorney adjusted his glasses slightly. Supplementary clauses related to continuation of the inheritance process, he said. Kate turned her head slightly. Continuation? Yes, he replied. She looked briefly at Paul. He had already taken his seat. He was watching, but not reacting. That told her more than she liked. Kate finally sat down, but did not touch the envelope yet. Explain, she said. The attorney opened a smaller document stacked beside it. While the primary will establishes equal inheritance under residency conditions, he began. There are additional provisions that become active depending on compliance and duration of stay. Kate narrowed her eyes. Compliance with what exactly? Residency and joint occupancy, he replied. She leaned forward slightly. We already covered that. Yes, the attorney said. This expands it. Kate looked at the sealed envelope again. Expands how, she asked. The attorney paused briefly before answering. In terms of shared authority over estate decisions, he said. Kate blinked once. Estate decisions? Yes, he confirmed. Certain rights regarding the property cannot be executed individually until both parties complete the required residency period. Kate leaned back slightly. So we're not just staying here, she said slowly. We're also restricted from acting independently on the inheritance itself. That is correct, the attorney said. Silence followed. Kate turned her head slowly toward Paul again. This was not mentioned yesterday, she said. Paul met her gaze. No, he said. Kate studied him carefully. Then she looked back at the attorney. And what happens if one of us refuses to continue? She asked. Finally, he said. Then the conditions of forfeiture apply. Kate nodded slightly, as if confirming something she already suspected. Meaning I lose everything, she said. Yes, he confirmed. Kate exhaled slowly. For a moment she did not speak. The room remained quiet, heavy with documentation and implication. Finally, she placed her hands on the sealed envelope, not opening it yet, just holding it. And she said quietly, so this is not just inheritance. No one corrected her. And that was the first time the room confirmed something without needing legal language to do it. Kate kept her hand on the sealed envelope for a moment longer than necessary, not because she was afraid to open it, but because she was measuring the intent behind it. Every document she had seen so far had added not just information, but limitation. And limitations, in her experience, always meant someone had anticipated resistance. She finally slid the envelope closer to herself, but still did not open it. Instead, she looked at the attorney. You keep adding layers, she said. The attorney adjusted his posture slightly. We are disclosing the full legal framework. That's not what I asked, Kate replied calmly. I said you're adding layers. A brief pause. Paul shifted slightly in his seat, but did not interrupt. The attorney continued, carefully. The will of Harold Whitmore contains conditional structures that are activated progressively. Kate tilted her head slightly. Progressively. Yes. So it's designed to unfold over time, she said. In practice, yes, the attorney confirmed. Kate let out a short breath through her nose and finally opened the envelope. Inside were more pages, not as neatly organized as the previous ones. Some printed, some handwritten, some with annotations in the margins that looked like they had been added later. Her eyes moved quickly. Property rights clarification, joint decision restrictions, estate maintenance obligations, financial distribution controls. Then she stopped. A section near the middle of the document repeated one phrase in slightly different legal wording. Neither inheritor may execute unilateral decisions affecting the estate during the active residency period. Kate frowned slightly. This is not about inheritance anymore, she said quietly. The attorney did not respond. She flipped another page. More restrictions. More conditional clauses. All variations of the same principle. Separation of control until completion of time requirement. The attorney's phone vibrated on the table. He glanced at it, his face turning a shade paler. Mr. Vance's counsel is already filing for a site inspection, he whispered. Paul looked at Kate, his jaw tightening. He's not just waiting for the clock to run out, Kate. He's trying to find a reason to prove we've already broken the residency rules. He's watching the gates. Kate closed the document slowly. So what exactly do we own right now? She asked. The attorney hesitated for a fraction of a second. Potential entitlement, he said. Kate looked up immediately. That's not ownership. It is conditional ownership, he corrected. That's not ownership, she repeated. Paul finally spoke from across the table, quietly. It becomes ownership after completion. Kate turned her gaze to him. And if we don't complete it? She asked. Paul didn't answer immediately. The attorney did instead. Then the entitlement is voided. Kate nodded slowly. So everything depends on us staying here for 180 days without breaking conditions, she said. Yes, the attorney confirmed. Kate leaned back slightly. And if one of us leaves, the other gets everything. Yes, he said again. She looked between them both. That part was already familiar, but the structure behind it was becoming clearer now. This is designed to create dependency, she said. The attorney frowned slightly. It is designed to ensure continuity of the estate. Kate shook her head slightly. Same thing, different wording. Paul watched her carefully, but did not interrupt. Kate finally opened the sealed envelope fully. Inside was a final sheet, shorter than the others, more direct. Her eyes scanned it once, then stopped completely. She didn't speak for a moment. The attorney noticed the change in her expression. Miss Caldwell, he asked. Kate did not respond immediately. Her gaze remained fixed on the page. Then she slowly placed it down. This clause wasn't mentioned, she said quietly. The attorney leaned forward slightly. Which clause? Kate tapped the paper once. External interference clause, she said. A pause filled the room. The attorney straightened slightly. That is standard in contested estates. Kate looked up at him. Contested by whom? She asked. The attorney began fumbling with his cufflinks, avoiding Kate's eyes. Paul's expression changed slightly for the first time, not visibly emotional, but attentive in a sharper way. Kate continued, voice steady. Because this mentions a third party. Silence followed. The attorney finally said, certain external claims may be asserted during the residency period. Kate turned her head slowly toward Paul. Like someone trying to take the property, she said. Paul met her gaze. Yes, he said quietly. Kate exhaled slowly. Finally, she said. The attorney looked uncomfortable. We will address any disputes if they arise. Kate closed the envelope and pushed it slightly forward. I think, she said, they already have. Paul's gaze stayed on her for a moment longer than before. And for the first time since she arrived at Ashwood Manor, the inheritance stopped feeling like a closed legal process and started feeling like something already being contested from the outside. The silence after Kate's last words did not feel like the end of discussion. It felt like a pause before something unavoidable. They already have, she had said. The attorney did not respond immediately. Paul also remained still, his attention fixed on the table, but not on any single document. Kate broke the silence first. I want a name, she said. The attorney looked up. I beg your pardon. If there's an external claim, Kate clarified, then there is a claimant. A person. A name. A brief pause followed. That information is not fully formalized in the current documentation, the attorney said carefully. Kate let out a short, controlled breath. That's a polite way of saying you're avoiding the answer. The attorney adjusted his papers slightly, visibly uncomfortable. Paul finally spoke. Richard, he said. Kate turned her head toward him immediately. The name was simple, clean, but it shifted the atmosphere in the room more than any legal clause had. Richard who? She asked. Paul didn't answer right away. The attorney looked between them, but remained silent. Paul finally said, a distant relative of Harold Whitmore. Kate narrowed her eyes. And he's claiming the estate. Yes, Paul confirmed. Kate leaned forward slightly. On what basis? Bloodline, Paul said. Kate shook her head slightly. That's not enough if there's a will. Paul's expression remained controlled. He is challenging the validity of parts of it. The attorney added quickly, there are legal objections being prepared regarding the structure of the inheritance. Kate looked between them. So this isn't settled, she said. No, the attorney admitted. It is currently subject to dispute. Kate sat back slowly. That changes things, she said quietly. It adds complexity, the attorney corrected. Kate gave him a sharp look. It changes things. No one contradicted her. A moment passed. Kate looked down at the documents again, but her focus was no longer on clauses or conditions. It was on intent. Richard, she repeated softly. Paul observed her carefully. Kate continued. He knows I'm here. Paul didn't answer immediately. That hesitation confirmed what she already suspected. Yes, he said finally. Kate nodded once. Of course he does. She walked to the window and pulled the curtain back just enough to see the main gate. A dark sedan was parked 100 yards down the road, its engine idling, a silent observer in the gray mist. It didn't move, but its presence felt like a countdown. She tapped the table lightly once with her fingers. So let me understand this properly, she said. I fly across the world to claim an inheritance that is already being challenged by someone else, and I'm now legally tied to staying in a house with a man I've never met, while that same inheritance is under dispute. The attorney began. That is a simplified. Kate interrupted immediately. That is exactly what it is. Silence. Paul spoke quietly. You still have control over your decision to stay. Kate looked at him. That's not control, she said. That's a consequence trap. Paul didn't respond. Kate stood up slightly from her chair, then sat back down again, controlled, not agitated, but clearly recalibrating. If Richard is actively challenging this, she said, then the 180-day condition isn't just inconvenient. It's strategic. The attorney frowned. Strategic? Kate looked at him directly. It prevents quick resolution, she said. It forces time. Time gives him room to intervene. Silence followed again. This time, no one corrected her. Paul finally spoke. That's why the condition exists, he said quietly. Kate turned toward him. Whose condition? Paul didn't answer immediately. The attorney looked down at the table. Kate noticed that silence. Slowly, she leaned back. Harold knew this would happen, she said. No one responded. That, in itself, was an answer. Kate closed the folder in front of her. Then this isn't just inheritance, she said again, more firmly than before. It's a protected transfer under pressure. Paul met her gaze. Yes, he said, and for the first time, the word inheritance no longer sounded like something given. It sounded like something defended. The phrase Kate had just used, a protected transfer under pressure, hung in the room longer than anyone seemed comfortable with. The attorney shifted slightly in his seat, but did not object. Paul remained still, watching Kate with an expression that had become harder to read the more she pushed into the structure behind the inheritance. Kate, however, was no longer focused on tone or atmosphere. Her attention had narrowed into something practical. If this is a dispute, she said, then there are procedures. The attorney nodded carefully. Yes. Court filings, she continued. Temporary injunctions. Asset freezes. Yes, he confirmed again. Kate looked at him directly. Have any of those been initiated? A pause. Yes, the attorney admitted. That answer changed the weight of the room again. Kate exhaled slowly through her nose. By Richard? Yes. She nodded once, as if confirming a calculation rather than reacting emotionally. So he's not just claiming, she said. He's actively trying to block access. Paul finally spoke. Yes. Kate turned slightly toward him. And you knew this before I arrived. Paul didn't deny it. I knew there was a risk of dispute, he said carefully. Kate's eyes narrowed. That's not the same thing. No, he agreed quietly. A silence followed. Kate looked down at the closed folder in front of her, then at the sealed envelope she had already opened earlier. The documents no longer felt like information. They felt like positioning. She tapped the table once. So Richard's strategy is delay and obstruction, she said. No one responded. She continued. And the 180-day residency clause makes it worse, she said, because it prevents either of us from easily stepping out of this situation to deal with it externally. Paul's gaze remained steady. Yes. Kate leaned back slightly. That means we're effectively locked into the estate while the legal fight happens around us, she said. The attorney interjected quickly. You are not locked in. You are under conditions of. Kate cut him off immediately. Legal restriction that results in total forfeiture if violated. She finished. Yes, I understand. Silence followed. Paul watched her carefully now. There was something different in her focus. Not fear, but alignment. She was no longer processing the inheritance as a personal burden. She was treating it as a system with opposing forces. Kate looked at him. Richard knows I'm here, she said again. Yes, Paul confirmed. And he knows I can't leave easily. A pause. Yes. Kate nodded slowly. So I'm not just an inheritor, she said. I'm leverage. No one corrected her. That silence was the clearest confirmation yet. Kate stood up from the chair fully this time. I need to see the legal filings, she said. The attorney hesitated. That is not typically. I didn't ask what is typical, Kate replied calmly. Paul stood as well, but did not move toward her. The attorney gathered a separate set of documents, visibly reluctant but compliant. He slid them across the table. Kate took them immediately. As she began scanning the first page, her expression remained controlled, but sharper than before. After a few seconds, she spoke without looking up. Richard Vance, she said. Paul's attention shifted slightly at the full name. Kate looked up now. So that's him. Paul nodded once. Yes. Kate closed the document slowly. Now it's clear, she said. The attorney asked cautiously, what is clear? Kate looked at him, then briefly at Paul. That this isn't just inheritance paperwork, she said. It's a contested asset with timing restrictions built into it. She paused, and I'm standing in the middle of it. No one argued. Outside the manor walls, the world continued as normal. Inside Ashwood Manor, the situation had finally taken its full shape, not as a mystery, but as a conflict already in motion. The attorney did not speak immediately after Kate's last statement. The words had settled in the room in a way that made further explanation feel almost unnecessary. It's a contested asset with timing restrictions built into it. Kate remained standing for a moment longer, holding the legal documents in her hand. Her focus was no longer on individual clauses. It was on structure, on how everything connected now that Richard Vance had a name and presence in the situation. Paul watched her quietly from his position beside the table. He had not interrupted since revealing the name, and that silence had become its own form of communication. Kate finally placed the documents back down. I need clarity, she said. The attorney nodded cautiously. Of course. No. Kate replied immediately. Not explanations. Clarity. A brief pause followed. Kate continued, her tone steady. What exactly happens next? Practically. The attorney glanced at Paul, then back at her. Next, he said carefully. Both inheritors are expected to maintain residency, while legal proceedings regarding the estate are resolved. Kate narrowed her eyes slightly. That's not an answer to my question. The attorney hesitated again. Paul stepped in quietly. Nothing changes immediately. Kate turned toward him. Nothing changes, she repeated. For now, Paul clarified. Kate studied him for a moment. And Richard? Paul didn't answer immediately. That hesitation was enough. Kate nodded once, as if confirming an internal conclusion. He continues building pressure externally, she said. Yes, Paul admitted. Kate exhaled slowly through her nose. So we're static here, she said, while everything around us moves. The attorney added quickly. The estate remains stable as long as conditions are met. Kate looked at him sharply. Stop calling it stable, she said. The attorney fell silent again. Paul's gaze remained on Kate. You can leave, he said quietly. Kate looked at him. But I lose everything, she replied. Yes, he confirmed. A pause followed. Kate looked down at the table again, then at the documents she had just reviewed. The structure was now fully visible. Not mysterious anymore, just restrictive. She spoke more quietly this time. So the condition isn't about living here, she said. It's about controlling the outcome of the dispute. Paul didn't correct her. That was answer enough. Kate looked up at him again. And you're part of this structure, she said. Paul held her gaze. Yes. No hesitation. No denial. The attorney shifted slightly, as if uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation, but said nothing. Kate walked slowly toward the window at the far end of the hall. She looked outside briefly, seeing only the estate grounds, quiet, contained, distant from everything she had known in Chicago. This was never just about inheritance, she said finally. Paul followed her with his eyes, but did not move. Kate turned back toward him. It's about who can endure the conditions long enough to secure it. Silence followed. No one contradicted her. That, more than anything else, confirmed she was no longer guessing. She was understanding. Kate returned to the table and picked up her folder. I'm staying, she said simply. The attorney blinked slightly. You are confirming acceptance of the conditions? Kate didn't look at him. I'm confirming I'm not walking away from what I came for, she said. Paul watched her closely. And Richard? He asked quietly. Kate finally looked at him. We deal with him, she said. Not emotional. Not uncertain. Decided. The room remained silent for a moment longer. And for the first time since Kate arrived at Ashwood Manor, the inheritance was no longer something happening to her. It was something she had chosen to step fully into. Kate stood in the main hall of Ashwood Manor, the final documents already signed and placed on the table. The last 4 days had passed in a quiet, almost unreal rhythm. No legal interruptions, no appearance of Richard Vance. Only the slow awareness that the condition was reaching its end. The cold hostility of the first week gradually eroded into a functional, quiet coexistence. The weeks bled into months, and the manor's layout became a shared map of their daily habits. Coffee shared in the small kitchen before sunrise, and evenings in the library where the silence was no longer heavy, but comfortable. The initial friction wore down into a fragile, calculated domesticity. They learned the language of the house together, the pipes that groaned at midnight, the windows that rattled in the east wind. Richard Vance didn't strike, but his presence lingered like a persistent fever, a slow-moving car at the gate, a sudden legal filing that led nowhere. In that vacuum of waiting, Kate and Paul stopped being strangers bound by a will and started becoming survivors of the same storm. Kate stopped viewing Paul as a legal barrier. Instead, he became the only person who truly understood the weight of the walls they were both protecting. By day 179, the estate didn't feel like a prison anymore. It felt like a sanctuary they had successfully defended together. The attorney closed his folder. "Residency requirement fulfilled," he said. 180 days completed. The formal verification of your stay effectively nullifies Mr. Vance's primary claim of abandonment. His injunctions have been lifted as of this morning. By fulfilling the residency clause, you have unlocked the estate's liquid accounts that were previously frozen by the dispute. The first wire transfer has already been authorized to the Chicago clinic, the attorney added, pushing a confirmation receipt toward her. Silence followed immediately after those words, heavier than any legal clause. Kate didn't respond at first. She simply looked at the paper in front of her, as if expecting it to change meaning now that the final line had been reached. But it didn't. It was final in the most literal way. She exhaled slowly. "So it's done," she said. "Yes," the attorney confirmed. Paul stood near the opposite side of the table. He didn't move, but something in him had already shifted, subtle, restrained, but real. The constant tension that had defined him inside this house was no longer active. It had no reason to be. Kate turned toward him. "I thought it would feel different," she said. Paul met her gaze. "It is different. You just expected it to be louder." That made her almost smile, but not quite. The attorney gathered his papers and gave a brief nod before leaving the room. The sound of his footsteps faded down the corridor, leaving only the two of them inside the hall and the estate itself beyond it. For a while, neither spoke. Then Kate said quietly, "So now what happens? We split it and leave." Paul didn't answer immediately. Outside the tall windows, Ashwood Manor remained exactly as it had been from the beginning. Old, structured, unchanged by the human decisions made inside it. "We could," Paul said finally. Kate studied him. "That doesn't sound like your answer." "It isn't," he admitted. A pause. Kate walked a few steps toward the window, looking out over the grounds. "I came here for money," she said. "That was the only reason." "I know," Paul replied. "But that's not what stayed," she added quietly. Paul didn't respond to that directly. Kate turned back toward him. "What did he mean to you?" she asked. Paul took a moment. "Your uncle," he said. "He gave me a place when I didn't have one. That's what this house was to me." Kate nodded slowly. "And me?" Paul met her gaze steadily. "He gave you a choice," he said, even if it didn't feel like it at first. Silence settled again. Kate looked down briefly, then back at him. "I don't want to sell it," she said. That was the first fully clear emotional decision she had made since arriving. Paul didn't look surprised. "I didn't think you would," he said. Kate exhaled. "It's strange. I hated this place the moment I arrived." "And now?" he asked. She looked around the hall once more. "Now it feels like something that actually belongs to someone," she said. "Not just property." A pause. Paul stepped slightly closer, but still kept distance. "So what do we do with it?" he asked. Kate met his eyes. "We don't sell it," she said. "We rebuild it. Properly. Something that actually lives." "Like what?" he asked. Kate thought for a moment. "Not a monument," she said. "And not a quick sale to Richard. We use the manor's liquid assets to pay for my mother's facility, but we keep the land. We keep the house as a barrier against people like him." Paul looked at her, seeing the strategist he had suspected was there all along. "It won't be easy," he noted. "It's a fortress now," Kate replied. "And I've learned how to live in a fortress." Richard Vance's car is gone from the gate, Paul noted, looking at the empty road for the first time without suspicion. He knows the clock has run out. He has no move left. Kate walked toward the iron gates, her hand steady as she pressed the release. For the first time in 6 months, she stepped beyond the boundary line without the weight of forfeiture hanging over her head. The black sedan at the end of the road lingered for a moment, its glass dark and impenetrable, before the engine roared and it sped away into the mist. Kate didn't flinch. She watched the taillights disappear, knowing that while Richard Vance had the bloodline, she had the stone, the soil, and the time. Kate followed his gaze. Let him stay in the past. We have a roof to mend. The medical trust is fully funded now, she added, more to herself than to him. She's safe. For the first time in years, I don't have to run. I can actually build something. Paul nodded slowly. That would take work. I know, she said. Another silence. This one was different. Not heavy, not uncertain, just open. Finally, Kate said, You're staying? It was not a legal question anymore. Paul understood that. Yes, he said simply. Kate nodded once. Good, she replied. They stood together in the center of the hall, no longer divided by the long table or the lawyer's folders. The silence of Ashwood Manor was still there, but for the first time, it didn't feel heavy. It felt like a clean slate. A faint pause followed. Then something softened in the space between them. Not dramatic, not sudden, just the result of everything they had gone through finally losing its pressure. Kate stepped slightly closer this time. Yes, he agreed. Kate didn't look away. It's still a fortress, Paul, Kate said, looking at the gray stone walls. It is, he agreed. Good. Then let's make sure the roof holds. Kate gave a small, quiet nod. Outside, Ashwood Manor stood unchanged. Inside, for the first time since Kate arrived, nothing was being forced to continue. Only chosen.